I don't really know how to start shows.
Come on now, don't start liking me now.
So yeah, I'm funny compared to, well, you'll see later. I stand for mayhem! I know a lot of idiots and think a lot of is mean-spirited just because it goes against what they believe. But the relief of comedy is it takes things that aren't funny and it allows us to laugh about them for an hour.
We got a purple suit to buy and a gigantic coffin.
Why are you laughing?
Evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Why Are You Laughing, a history of comedy podcast. And today, I am pleased to introduce to you The Simpsons and a very special guest returning to Why Are You Laughing for the third time. This is a big, we should have a blazer for you or something. This is very exciting. You would go back and listen to the Mitch Hedberg episode, and he was on Patreon talking about his boyfriend, Tucker Max. It's my pal from WATS and some other show that he does. Karl, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, what's going on, Craig? What's going on, Mike? Good to see you guys. And I don't expect to have anything special until my 5th episode. That's when I feel like I joined the club.
It's an illustrious group. You and Vinnie Paulino are leading the charge of repeating guests. So I asked Karl on, obviously, because he's a big Simpsons fan. And I was saying, me and Craig were talking about this right before we started, that I feel like my generation, like I was born in 91, and I feel like people who are around my age know of The Simpsons. And I'm like very aware of how funny it is. And every time I hear quotes from it or people explain certain scenes or episodes, I find it very funny. But it's just that by the time I was old enough to be watching The Simpsons and actually understand it, they were already at a point where people saying they were over the hill, and that was 20 years ago, which is fucking nuts.
Right. Yeah. A lot of people like to cite season 9, season 10, season 11 as the time when The Simpsons got bad. And actually, this Simpsons wasn't good until I would say like halfway through season 3. Right. Is when it really started finding its voice, because when it first started, it was kind of more like a kid's cartoon. It wasn't very funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It was shifted. Like, I mean, and the writers all talk about how it was geared more towards Bart in the beginning. And then they realized that Homer was probably a better character to carry the show and easier to write for, because the writers could relate to a father more than, a 10-year-old kid or whatever.
It's also funny how Homer's voice changes between, I think, 2 and 3.
Oh,
it's the same. Yeah. It's the same voice actor. Yeah. But what he said was, he goes, the way I was doing Homer's voice was actually very straining on my voice. And I realized that this was going to get picked up and go on for a long time. I'm like, I got to make this easier on myself.
Well, it's good, though, because I feel like comedically they made the right choice. Like Homer's voice now is much funnier than I think he said he was like doing a Walter Matthau impression originally. So,
yeah, right.
I was looking.
Oh, no.
Go ahead.
So we will go through all of that in order. Well, we'll jump around as far as the timeline, but first I do want to remind everyone, first and foremost, go to whoarethese.com for Karl. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Go to whoarethese.com. That's where you can find all your links for WATP, including his Patreon that you guys should check out and subscribe to. And I mean, maybe click the links for WATS as well. Thursdays at 6. Check that out. And you can also find those at blindmike.net if you want to check out this show, WATS, Blind Mike Project, or more importantly, our Patreon, where we do bonus episodes. We just put up, or are putting up, I forget when this comes out, a Prank Calls bonus episode. After we did the Jerky Boys episode, I wanted to talk about prank calls from people outside of the Jerky Boys. And your boy, Karl, hit me up with a correction. Christian Blatt emailed me and told me I was very wrong when I said that the Simpsons were influenced by the Jerky Boys. And it was actually a group called Bum Bar Bastards that Bart prank calls to Moe's Tavern.
Okay.
That was influenced by Bum Bar Bastards. So, Christian Blatt, I apologize to you and the listeners out there. I will always make corrections, so feel free to send them to me.
Unlike my show, where our policy is
no fact checking.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do here. We don't check the facts before, and then we correct them after.
All right.
We made enough noise on Twitter that we have to say something.
Yes. All right. So, I mean, Simpsons, there's fucking 35 years of history to go through. So I know I'm not going to touch anywhere close to all of it. I'm going to try my best. So let's just start with whatever clips we have here. Where are we starting, Craig?
The creation.
All right, let's hear it.
You just start with, there's this thing that happens where now a show like The Simpsons seems inevitable. You know, it's just become this cultural touchstone, and people say, well, of course. And what I'm trying to do is go back to a time when it was highly improbable and probably even considered a bad idea. The last successful animated show had been The Flintstones. And I guess I'll start with you guys who were there at the very beginning. Suddenly, the idea comes along on Fox to do an animated primetime show. And I don't think people thought it was a good idea. Is that right?
What happened was one of the directors, David Silverman, who's brilliant, was at a party and he had a little too much to drink, and he said to Jim Brooks, I think it should be a series. And he was so emphatic and so enthusiastic about doing another primetime series. You know, there'd never been one, like you said, for years, that Jim said, well, if somebody loves this so much, why don't we give it a shot? And, you know, then Jim and Matt and Sam Simon hired writers, and it was never inevitable.
In addition to that, I will just say that at the Tracy Ullman Show, we used to show The Simpsons back to back, the little shorts back to back to the audience, and they laughed significantly more than they actually laughed at the Tracy Ullman Show. I mean, it was clear that this had potential. This was something I think you didn't need a drunk David Silverman to say, oh my God, I think we
No, it was only drunk David.
Yeah, because
So it's actually, I think, a pretty interesting point that Conan makes is that now it seems like a brilliant idea to just make essentially a sitcom, a family sitcom, but animated, because now we know that like cartoons get away with so much more. Like the stuff that South Park gets away with, for whatever reason, if that was live action, it would never be on television. But if cartoons say it, it's fun and silly for whatever reason. So now it seems like an obvious idea. We'll just make it a cartoon. But at the time, no one had ever really done that before. I think even the Flintstones, while like, I don't know if its direct existence was supposed to appeal to adults more than children, whereas The Simpsons literally was for adults.
Yeah, and I want to point out, so you saw in that clip, even though he didn't talk in it, this guy, Mike Reese, who was a writer and a showrunner, I think he might still be on the show. And just like the Tucker Max episode, I have brought a book with me. I've read this book, Springfield Confidential, written by Mike Reese, or Rice, however you pronounce it, and highly recommend it. It really gets into the behind the scenes, how the show gets created, the writers, the episodes. If you're a fan of The Simpsons, this is a great read. The only issue is, and you'll probably get into this, he went on to develop The Critic, the John Lovitz cartoon. And so he left The Simpsons for a few years to do that. And he writes about The Critic a little bit too much in this book for my liking.
It stinks.
Well, we will talk a lot about The Critic, because that in part is kind of what started breaking up The Simpsons. There are two particular episodes that we'll talk about that people say kind of led to the demise of The Simpsons. I also think Carl, the real reason he likes coming on this show is because in this group, he appears studious.
I know, right? All I'm doing is reading comedy. I'm just reading comedy books. And I'm like, yeah, look at all the research I
You
did.
have 2 books?
I feel like if you remove that book sleeve, though, it might still be a Tucker Max book. You just can't escape them.
Well, guys, let me know when you're doing the Why Are You Laughing About Ann Coulter. I'll be happy to come on that one.
Yes, a barrel of laugh she is. So this was a pretty interesting thing because, like, Conan, I mean, for anyone that doesn't know, Conan was obviously a writer in the early days, not an original writer, but in the very early days of The Simpsons as well.
Here's a fun fact.
Yeah.
Conan was a very young guy when he joined the writing crew there. And they have this thing once or twice a year where they bring in all the executive producers and the writers all pitch ideas. And so they go through and they present what they think the episode should be in the plot and all that kind of stuff. Conan's the only guy to get 2 of his ideas approved for one season.
Oh, really?
Out of all the brilliant writers around that show, the monorail episode, and I forget the other one. But Conan understood this show very well.
And that makes so much sense as a guy who just watched his late night show. He feels like he would have been a Simpsons writer. Yeah. And he's, like you said, he was definitely integral in those days. He wasn't a guy that just happened to be there and later get famous. Like, he was a big part of those early seasons.
I was just thinking how much more fun the Simpsons would be if the masturbating bear character had done a crossover. Do you guys remember the masturbating bear on the Conan show?
Yes, and he couldn't do that on TBS. It was very sad when he lost that.
Yeah, it was upsetting.
But one of my favorite stories I've heard Conan tell about The Simpsons is that monorail episode. I think it's titled Marge versus the Monorail or something like that.
Yeah.
He wanted to get George Takei to do the voice. I think they ended up getting Leonard Nimoy, but they originally asked George Takei, and he refused to do it, and apparently said, "I take monorails very seriously." He's the only guy that refused to do it because of his love of monorails, apparently. He wouldn't make sport of them.
That's ridiculous.
It's wild. George Takei's the strangest guy on the planet.
He really is. He is a weirdo.
Easily.
All right. What's our next clip, Craig?
The Tracy Ullman Show.
Yeah, so that's, you heard them allude to it there, but that is where this started, is on the Tracy Ullman Show as part of these interludes that they were doing. So they're going to talk a little more about that.
And I think it's the same thing that we used to talk about with The Simpsons, is that the voices were impeccably cast from the beginning. The design, really.
Well, all of them were in the shorts. The main ones, Dan. It was Dan and Julie, Dan Kessler and Julie Kavner were on the Tracy Ullman Show. And as I understand it, Tracy Ullman was too busy to do any of the parts. So
she hated it as well.
She hated it.
She hated
really?
it. Yes. I'm free to say.
She hated the cartoons?
Oh, yes. She wanted it off the show. Right. And then later on she sued for money because she said, I breastfed these babies and these were from my show. Like, no, she had nothing to do with it, and actively tried to get it off the show. So
what's weird about re-listening to that clip now is I found after I didn't include the clip because it wasn't particularly interesting, but I found Tracy Ullman talking about the early days of The Simpsons, and she claims she was Marge originally. She says she did the voice, and literally right there they're saying she wanted nothing to do with it, and she was not Marge. So I don't know what to believe now.
She probably did a voice that they copied or something on set.
She was able to. She did the impression, and it sounded close enough that I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe she did do the first version of it or something." But she apparently wanted no part of it. Really, didn't get what was appealing about it. And really, all these interludes were like in and out of commercial breaks, basically.
Yeah, it was a sketch comedy show that I bet didn't age well. If I were to guess, the Tracy Ullman Show, if we were to watch that now, I doubt it would be very good. I remember my folks liked it, so they used to watch it. But yeah, those little Simpsons shorts that they would have on that show were not funny. They were not well animated. And to think about what the Simpsons became based on those little things, it's not even the same show in any single way.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I thought it was interesting. I found a bunch of I might be all of them on YouTube, the interludes that they used, and I wanted to include one. We might have one later just by accident. It happens to be in one of the clips. But like you said, they weren't particularly, none stood out to me as like, oh, we should really play this. It's hilarious.
The people need to see it.
Yeah. I think we have one more clip from this Conan discussion.
Yep, them talking about it becoming an instant hit.
Okay.
It was like 6 weeks in, it was the cover of Newsweek. Right. That was amazing. The other thing is, I've read a bunch of Simpsons books and theses about the show, and they'll always say the show was slow to build and had a small following, and the show debuted to the highest ratings in the history of the Fox network.
That was the Christmas episode.
Yeah, it came on, it was an instant, nothing could be a more instant hit.
Yeah, so they did, they had kind of a weird schedule because they premiered with like a Christmas special. I saw like Matt Groening was on Letterman promoting it. It was like this hour-long Christmas special was their first episode, and then the rest of the episodes aired like in the new year, I guess, which is a very weird way to do it. But evidently, like you heard there, was off to a very fast start, which is impressive because like Fox was a network that was dying at the time. Like they had virtually nothing, and it was The Simpsons and Married with Children that you could argue are kind of similar shows. So it's weird that those both worked, but that's what really put them on the map.
If you're curious what Al Bundy's like in cartoon form, that's the show for you.
More or less. It's Homer Simpson. Yeah.
There's a little bit more anti-woman stuff going on Married with Children.
Yeah,
I don't think The Simpsons is all in on the no ma'am movement.
Yeah.
But other than that, I can see the similarities. And the thing about The Simpsons taking off so quickly, and I kind of remember this, I was a big Simpsons fan even back then, is they were promoting this show for years on the Tracy Ullman Show. So everyone already knew who they were. They already had merchandise out. Like people were already fans of this family.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. In my mind, it was always something that never got any attention. And then someone was like, let's make a show out of it.
No, I think that was probably one of the most popular parts of the Tracy Ullman Show. They did mention that. I guess I didn't really realize how popular the Tracy Ullman Show was. I just assumed no one was watching it, so no one ever noticed these things. You know what's it's interesting about that though, Mike, and not to get bogged down in this, but yeah, nobody was watching Fox. It had very low ratings.
Yeah.
But if you think about it, they probably had more people watching Fox back then because there was only 4 networks. Then people are watching primetime CBS now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, bad ratings is like 8 million people watching at that time.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, to put it in perspective, I've never heard of the Tracy Ullman Show until cutting these clips.
Oh, wow.
Is that right?
I had no idea.
There you go. If it got by Craig, then.
And I was born in the 80s, you know?
well, like we kind of started talking about in those early days, like Bart was the star of the show to the point where literally the Bart Man was like a song that got radio play. And when you go back and watch, you almost get like douche chills. I imagine as like a Simpsons fan, you would think like, oh, this isn't even the same show. It's like when I watch, the first season of Seinfeld and George is essentially Woody Allen. It's like, well, this isn't the show what the fuck is this?
Right.
Kramer's got his hair matted down. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it was definitely a show for children, and they based it. To think about how brilliant The Simpsons became, it started out as catchphrases. It was just don't have a cow and eat my shorts. Like that was all they had. Bart's going to say some crazy shit. And that's going to be the show. Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, I remember that a lot too. Cause like I said, I wasn't like a Simpsons fan, but I remember I had, and I'm saying that I wasn't anti-Simpsons. I just never got into it. But I had like a Bart doll, I think at some point, or a Homer t-shirt. I remember having Simpsons merch, even though I really didn't watch the show that much.
It's all your uncles going, oh, this would be funny on them.
Yeah, this is what a kid would want, I guess. Yeah.
Cause I did the same thing. We were talking before. Obviously, like this show spawned South Park and Family Guy and all that. So that was more of my wheelhouse when I became of age.
But I will say what's different about because you always hear the comparisons, and I mean, there's obvious similarities to Family Guy.
Oh yeah.
In the crossover episode they do with Family Guy, they point out how many of the characters in Family Guy are essentially twists on Simpsons characters.
Right.
So there definitely are similarities, but what they talk about with The Simpsons is that like cartoons before that were a lot of like gags. There wasn't necessarily a storyline to them.
Right.
And what I think James L. Brooks is the one who really wanted this more than Sam Simon or Matt Groening, was that the show had heart. Like you would follow it as you would a sitcom. You know, maybe sometimes you'd learn a lesson or there'd be a touching moment. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing at that time for a cartoon to be doing because it seems so, offbeat from every other cartoon.
Every episode that focused on Lisa, that the plot was built around Lisa, were my least favorite episodes because those are always the ones where everyone learns a lesson and there's heart. And it's like, all right, let's get back to gags. And I just want to point out, because everyone had Simpsons t-shirts and stuff. I had a ton of them.
Yep.
But this is how deep I go, guys. I got to the point where I'm not wearing any Simpsons shirt unless it's like an ancillary character. So I had like my Sideshow Bob t-shirt. Like I'm not wearing Homer.
You hear that, ladies?
That's too easy.
Don't slide off your feet.
I had a girl tell me, I was in my 20s at this point. I had a girl tell me that I wasn't her type. She doesn't date guys who wear cartoons on their t-shirts.
Hey, I'm not some loser that wears a Homer shirt. I've got the Bumblebee.
I know. I had a, I don't know if you guys ever watched Ren and Stimpy, but I had a log t-shirt, which is just like a random fake commercial. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you see this, ladies, but this is Groundskeeper Willie. I'm open for business.
All right. What's next?
Talking about Fox.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it was still a new network at that time. So this was definitely big for them.
I came to sort of drew what became of The Simpsons.
Wow.
That's James L. Brooks. And he also later said that Matt Groening, when he came up with the characters for The Simpsons, when they wanted to come up with these, these bits on the Tracy Ullman show, that Life in Hell that he just mentioned, it was a Matt Groening creation that he wanted to protect. So he's like, all right, I'll just turn in whatever bullshit I come up with. And that was The Simpsons. So the thing he wanted to protect, no one knows what Life in Hell is really, but The Simpsons has been an institution for 30 years now.
Also, good on Matt Groening, because he created these characters, but he didn't really create what the show became. Obviously, he hired people to do that, and the writers and all that kind of stuff. It'd be like if somebody took core of these podcasts and made it a good show. That'd be amazing. I would love for that to happen.
That's what I think of WATS as. We've really morphed it into a great.
That's true.
Yeah. But so the three creators, James L. Brooks, Sam Simon, and Matt Groening, are all attributed with bringing like very different things to the show. Matt Groening obviously created the characters, and I guess was big on pushing for the satire and the sarcasm. Basically, the adult humor that was in The Simpsons came from Matt Groening. Like I mentioned, the heart was really from James L. Brooks, I guess. Which, by the way, it is kind of funny. You mentioned the thing about Lisa, and I think it was kind of true of Marge as well, where if the A story focused on them, it was going to be like a heartfelt episode. It's a weird way of kind of like being sexist in a way. And it's something that Always Sunny actually corrected, where in season 1, Dee's character is always like, guys, come on, should we really do this? And then she kind of complained about it, and they were like, all right, you're one of the guys now, and just changed her character to be like everyone else, which I think was a good
smart move. Yeah, definitely.
For sure.
And Sam Simon is kind of the one that wanted to drive a lot of the characters, thought that like, the stories are in these characters and kind of creating, people that you feel like or can relate to in some way. So it's pretty rare, and I don't think they all ended up necessarily getting along, which we'll get to, but it is pretty rare that 3 guys seem to contribute to a show fairly equally by all accounts.
Yeah. And by the way, I just want to point out, I just realized something as you're talking.
Mm-hmm.
So I always hated the Lisa episodes. I wrote a lyric in a song that I wrote a long time ago about that too. And I just realized I don't even like Yeardley Smith, the woman who voices Lisa, because of the Lisa character. Like I actively dislike her, and I think that's why.
It's weird. We might have one that we'll play later, but like I was looking through clips of interviews with her, and she sounds so much like Lisa Simpson that I'm like, that's got to be a weird way to go through life.
She doesn't change her voice at all. She was on a TV show called Herman's Head, where I don't know if she was one of the characters in his head, or you have this guy navigating like his office job. You guys ever heard of this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then you like cut to these clips of like what's going on as inner monologue, these people debating this stuff or whatever. And she was on that show, and it was so off-putting because it's just Lisa Simpson's voice on live action. It's just weird.
That's the ultimate, like, you hear character actors talk all the time about how you couldn't get cast in anything else, but that's literally, we only know your voice, and it's going to be very distracting if Lisa Simpson is in a television show.
Yeah, no, for real. She's the Mark Hamill of cartoons.
Yeah, right. All right, what's next?
Them talking about the sitcom style.
Well, like I said, I find that pretty interesting. Obviously, a lot of influence, I think, a comparison that it gets a lot is like All in the Family, which I think applies a little bit, but not entirely. But let's hear it.
We were the kind of the first of this idea, this concept of taking the sitcom style of writing a show with a writer's room with animation. I remember very well Matt coming the first day. We were all happy to meet him. We loved Life in Hell, and he was a great guy, and he went through these sketches for the first episode, Goodnight Simpson. The first show I directed was, in fact, Bart the Genius.
This is a big day for you. Why don't you eat something a little more nutritious?
Nonsense, Marge. Frosty Krusty Flakes are what got him where he is today. It could be one of these chemicals here that makes him so smart.
I included that only because I wanted you guys to hear what early Homer was like.
Sounds like he's choking on his tongue.
It sounds like something that wasn't supposed. That's the weird thing about that voice, and maybe we think that just because we know how it all played out. but that version of Homer sounds like something that never should have made television. It's like a bad rough draft or something, which is essentially what it was.
I agree, and I would tell him to
Be more funny.
I'm sorry, I have to use these drops on my board. It's contractually obligated. I apologize.
Now that's a hilarious voice.
Yeah, it is. It is very funny.
Boring.
Another thing, I didn't think to credit them in my show prep or anything, but like every radio show for the last 30 years essentially has used Homer Simpson drops.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
There's no other show. I think they have to be the most dropped show in radio history, I think.
I would agree with that. South Park's probably up there, but yeah.
South Park's close for sure, but I think I hear Homer on no matter what sports shows, comedy shows, everything. You hear Homer.
The Boo from O&A.
Yeah. Maybe that's just what I'm thinking.
That one.
Yep. When I started pulling together drops for Who Are These Podcasts, before we even did our first episode, I was so heavily influenced by O&A. I went and grabbed like everything on car crashes and Homer saying boring and boo.
Yeah. I like Carl like on his notepad, like blabbermouth cunt, check.
I did. Stupid fucking blabbermouth cunt.
That one's all producer Chris. When we did our live show in Chicago, this isn't about me, but it's about me. We did our live show in Chicago and we're prepping at the Airbnb and Chris goes, "What can I do to help, Carl?" And I go, "This woman on this podcast, I can't stand her. Can you find someone calling someone a cunt for a drop?"
No problem.
You remember this from The Sopranos, Uncle Junior. So, it's like, perfect.
It's the best there is.
On the board ever since.
All right, let's get back on track here, Craig.
We got Sam Simon.
Yeah, so I think Sam Simon's a very interesting character, and maybe it was hard to find a lot on him because he retired so young. I was going to say, maybe I'll do an episode on him someday. I just don't know if there's enough out there. But he's a very interesting character, and he left The Simpsons pretty early on. And I had always heard of him referred to as a very bitter guy. When I listened to interviews of him, I didn't necessarily get that sense, but we'll listen and judge, I guess.
Well, did you guys catch him on Howard Stern when you were doing the research for this?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, because he was a regular on there, so I'm surprised to say you don't know a lot about him. I'm like, I know Sam the best out of all of them.
Yeah. Well, I guess as far as stuff related to The Simpsons, because I wanted to find more on why they actually broke up and why he left, because I would read things like he felt he didn't get enough credit. But then every interview I heard, he says, I have no issue with James L. Brooks and Matt Groening. I couldn't find them talking shit about him. So maybe maybe we'll do a part 2 if you guys can find that for me.
It's amazing how tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars will make you look back fondly on.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Let's hear from Sam.
The goal was to do 13 great shows. And I used to say, we're 13 and out. We might as well make them great. Mm-hmm. And I know that really upset Matt. He didn't express this to me at the time. If he had said, hey, this is really important to me, and when you say that, it makes me think like the show's going to be a failure, and I don't think I would say, oh, okay. Well, I won't say. I can understand.
But you were saying that because you'd been in show business and you knew that.
Most things fail.
Right.
And, and so, like, let's just try and make it as good as we can.
Yeah.
They would say, oh, this language, there's going to be children watching. And I'd say, I don't know about that. We're doing our show. That's your problem. We're on right next to Married with Children. So I don't see why
not gonna be too squeamish.
I can't say, son of a bitch or something like that on the show. But when I was saying it, I meant, let's be free and let's be creative.
Let's make it great.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like The Simpsons kind of lived up to that. So it's good to have someone there. Like, I think it was it seems like a good balance between the creators, because if James L. Brooks was focused on making it sort of a heartfelt family bonding moment, I feel like you needed guys that thought like Sam Simon that said, yeah, but we can get a little raunchy too if we want to,
Well, that also triggered me something that I was reading up on in this book by Mike Reese, because, they get asked a lot, is The Simpsons as good as it used to be? And obviously everyone knows the answer to that.
Sure.
And so what he said was, he goes, we've been doing this a long time, And certain sitcoms will go different directions. They'll either get boring or they'll get weird. And we chose purposely to get weird. I never want to be boring. So it's like The Simpsons has gotten weird, but it's like they're aware of that and actively tries it. We've done over 2,000 storylines because of the subplots and things in these episodes. So we're now working on our 2,112th best idea. It's not going to be as good as it used to be, but we can make it weird for the sake of being weird.
I remember Kevin Nealon going on Conan to promote the last season of Weeds, which Weeds is a show that, I mean, unanimously, anyone that watched it says it got bad after a couple seasons. And Conan was asking him about the finale. And Kevin Nealon goes, well, they say you always want to go out on top. And I think we only missed that by about 5 years.
That's great.
Yeah, so they don't have the benefit of South Park, which basically talks about current events. So they're just never-ending possibilities for them.
Yeah, well, that's I think that's what makes South Park so much more equipped to continue on for as long as it has.
Right.
Because The Simpsons are being written like 10 months in advance. So I was listening to a lot of there's a lot of points where like The Simpsons are predicting the future, basically. They'll have a joke about like Trump being president or, something that relates to 9/11 before it happened or things like that. And they obviously this doesn't apply to 9/11, but they said in general, like with elections and stuff like that, they were essentially trying to go for the funniest thing that could happen in 10 months.
Yes.
Like they wanted it to be relevant 10 months later. So they were kind of just guessing at things. And when you do 3,000 episodes, some of them are going to turn out to be right,
Right.
Yeah, I don't think their batting average is high, but
right, exactly.
Excited.
Right.
Yeah, but then when you look at they had Trump winning, I think it was an election and going down the elevator in an episode, you're like, that's kind of weird.
Sure, it is, but then go and think back, like Trump would be a hilarious guy in like a Back to the Future type setting to be like, President Donald Trump?
Right.
Like, that is kind of a go-to reference.
Right.
Well, also, people forget this. Donald Trump would threaten to run for president almost every election.
Every year.
Right.
I mean, going back to like the late 80s, he started talking about that.
Yeah, it was him and Roseanne Barr.
All right. I think we have one more Seth Simon, right?
Sam.
Sam Simon. Jesus Christ. Did I do that? I think I've done that already. Sam Simon. I don't want to hear from Seth Simon.
Oh, God, I hope not. This is him talking about leaving.
Okay.
How many seasons were you there?
4.
And what happened there?
4.
How was the breakup? Why did you leave?
I left because I wanted to do my own stuff. I didn't especially like it there. I was being asked to do things that I wasn't good at, which means I was supposed. They hired a bunch of other writers to do 3 on-air shows at ABC.
Yeah.
And I just I wasn't full-time I wasn't going to be full-time on The Simpsons.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do my own stuff. And I had a great, technically I was never fired from The Simpsons. I still earn a salary and I kept all my points in the show.
Yeah.
And so to me it's was really it's not remotely a regret.
Yeah, but there's no bad blood anymore.
I don't think so. I see Jim once in a while.
Yeah,
I don't see Matt very often, but we just don't travel in the same circles.
Right.
Sounded like he's not saying what he wants to say or what he should say.
Right, because the rumors were that he was mad that he didn't get enough credit. And that Matt and James L. Brooks didn't like certain things that like he would critique the show for. So it seems like at the time they didn't really like each other. But like you said, Carl, when you're making crazy amounts of money and you don't see someone for 15, 20 years, that starts to dissipate a little bit. And I don't know how long this number lasted. Like I don't know how his contract worked or anything like that. You hear him there in about 2011 saying that he was still getting a paycheck from The Simpsons. At a point after he left the show, he was getting $10 million a year for doing nothing.
Yeah, It was interesting that he said, I wasn't fired. No one said you
no one brought it up. They never just bring it up. Right? He's just like, hey, I wasn't fired.
Yeah, his name is on the front of every single episode. Like his name is still there. I mean, I assume that he's still getting royalties and he has points. And like, that's weird that he said it that way. I wonder what that means. Yeah.
I wasn't forced out against my will.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But it is interesting because he essentially retired at the age of 35. So Sam Simon's a guy that he was a showrunner for Taxi when he was, I think, like 23. I think he worked on Cheers a little bit. So he was in the business very young, made all this Simpsons money, and essentially retired at 35. Like he would have his, hand in certain things over the rest of his life. But like, I know he did a lot of like charity work. I think he gave all his money away when he died. He didn't have kids or anything.
Yeah, he loved animals. I know that a lot of what he did was he was a philanthropist who really devoted himself to helping animals and endangered species and stuff like that.
Yeah, very interesting guy. And I know he got into it with Dave Attell on Stern once. So maybe we'll revisit Sam Simon someday. But for now, we move along.
This is about them beating Cosby.
Yeah, so this was a big deal at the time. I guess they were up against the cause, and it's sort of the juxtaposition. I don't know if I'm using that term right. I never have before, but I think it's a juxtaposition between, oddly, the classic Family Man being serial rapist Bill Cosby, and the Simpsons, who were considered like the dirty, the wrong side of the tracks family.
The animated show's season premiere beat out The Cosby Show by a small margin. The Simpsons had a gigantic publicity push behind it, which may account for the lead, says John Mandel of Gray Advertising.
I don't think there was a child alive that didn't know Simpsons was on and probably defected from Cosby in droves.
I passed!
So I think that's the most impressive thing about The Simpsons is that they can literally appeal to anyone. In that they have the Simpsons have some like very highbrow humor, almost snobby humor.
Yeah.
And they also have just the most childish, silly nonsense.
Well, it's pointed out in this book. Yeah. He goes through and he talks about the writers, and they have writers who are scientists, and most of their writers have like PhDs and advanced degrees.
Yeah.
So the people who write for The Simpsons are extremely intelligent people. But
I mean,
right,
even like Conan went to Harvard. I think a lot of those guys are like Harvard grads, and
yeah, exactly.
So and I think that's the most impressive thing. I don't know how many other shows are like that, where you could literally meet a blithering idiot and a professor, and they would both like The Simpsons for different reasons.
It's true.
Next, we have the Bushes.
Yeah, this is interesting. They've had a weird history with the Bushes, and they were kind of used as political fodder at a certain point. Like, so the Simpsons are a runaway train by the time Bush Sr. Was finishing up his term, and he used the Simpsons in one of his speeches. I think actually first it was his wife that I think we're going to hear about. It was Barbara Bush originally.
It seemed that everything was fine. We had sent our own slightly humorous letter. She had sent an almost gracious reply, and the matter was over. And then George Bush addressed the Convention of Religious Broadcasters in the United States and said this.
Well, let me tell you something. We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
So we responded at the very top of our very next episode because they had been prompt with their letter to us, and we wanted to be prompt.
We are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
Huh? Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too.
So it's kind of funny to look back after, like, I'll keep referencing South Park and Family Guy, which is also everything we have on, the internet now and all that type of shit. It's funny to look back that the Simpsons were viewed as like this taboo thing, because now it seems so family friendly to me.
Barbara Bush is like, if I ever get my hands on Marge, it's going down.
That's literally that's what it was. Is they were saying like this is improper for families to be watching, which it seems now, at least in hindsight, it seems like the most family show. It seems like the best.
Well, I don't know if you know this, Mike, but Homer likes to strangle his son very violently.
That's true. That's a good point.
I don't know if that's family friendly, but
why you little?
Did the Simpsons take pot shots at the Bushes up till that point, or is this just random?
I mean, it wasn't random in the sense that like the Simpsons were a massive show, so it makes sense to use them as an example.
Yeah.
I don't think they were particularly harsh on the Bushes one way or the other. But.
Wasn't George Bush on the show after that?
I believe so. They've had a weird history where, like I said, they had this exchange where James L. Brooks wrote them a letter as Marge Simpson, which I would have included it, but it was a little exhausting, frankly.
The voice.
And then that's when they kind of thought they patched things up. And then I guess Brooks ran into the first lady at some event and she completely snubbed him. And he's like, what the fuck is going on? It was a weird thing where they didn't really know how to handle those guys, I guess.
Barbara Bush might be a complete idiot, though, because they sent a letter as Marge Simpson and she replied. And the PS was, I think Homer's a handsome fella.
I think she was being cute.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not convinced.
I think that Craig thinks she's like, hey, introduce me to Homer.
I got to get his suntan lotion. I love the color.
All right.
Next we have writer turnover.
Well, this is like a thing that happens to shows. I just found it interesting because now they're at season 35 or whatever they're at. But this is in the very early days. And like Karl said, a lot of people think the show didn't really hit its stride until season 3 or 4. So this was an interesting thing they had to deal with.
It was a small group, and nobody really knew how difficult it was to do, say, 24 episodes of an animated show. What happened was you didn't realize that as you were doing new ones, the old ones were coming back and requiring an enormous amount of work. So we cut back to 22 and got more people in the staff. The other thing that happened in the first 4 seasons was everyone associated with the show got an offer to go somewhere else to develop their own show, and people left for different places, and Jim asked us to work on the critic. So there was like a total changeover of the staff from basically season 4 to season 5. When David Merkin ran it, he was going to rely on Conan to be like his number one guy, but then Conan got his own show. And, what happened subsequently was then the TV business dried up in comedy. And so people didn't leave. And, Mike Scully broke the rewrite room into 2. We had enough writers at that point. So now we always have 2 groups going at the same time. Usually I'm doing one and Matt Selman's doing the other, rewriting the scripts.
Yeah, so I feel like when you factor that in, like they take a lot of shit for going as long as they have when everyone pretty much considers it dead. But it is obviously impressive that they were able to kind of withstand all that turnover, in addition to what Karl said earlier, where it's like, you just run out of ideas at a certain point. Like, how do you keep that going for as long as they did?
Yeah, and then
it definitely attracted very creative writers, though, because you could do anything. Any idea you had, like they had whole musical episodes where they're and they have a full orchestra recording this music and everything like that. So it's like the sky's the limit for them.
Yeah. And well, that's the interesting line. They tried to walk, and I know Matt Groening was very against it. I think we're about to get into some of the specific episodes in a minute. But for example, like there's some gag in like season 6, I want to say, where Homer falls off of something and just the fall is continuously getting more and more ridiculous to a point where like a human being would obviously be dead. And so Matt Groening was like, we can't do this. It's too silly and ridiculous. But then they were able to like make it funny enough that they kind of compromised and left it in. But it's like over time, when you're doing it for 30 years, eventually you got to keep being more ridiculous than you were the last time, or it's not as funny. But then there's a fine line where it's like, well, the more ridiculous, it's a tough balance that when you go for 30 years, it's almost impossible to withstand.
Yeah, and South Park did the Simpsons did it episode. Now imagine being the Simpsons and you can't copy yourself at all because you are the foundation. Next we have contract disputes.
Well, this I remember hearing a lot about, and it's interesting because well, let's hear them talk about it first, and then I'll say what I have to say.
It's great to take on the big
is.
gorilla. It's great. And it's taught me a lot. And it's taught me, that's right. Although we had that negotiation in season 9 where they threatened to replace us. And then they held auditions.
Oh, they did actually hold
yes.
auditions.
Oh, yes.
And what happened with, what was the focus group feedback?
Well, they didn't record any shows. Mm-hmm. I do think it might have been Jim Brooks and Matt Groening who said, "You're kidding, right? You don't actually think that just because nobody sees these people, they don't care they won't notice or they're not attached to, and not just the sound of, if this is Lisa Simpson, you don't just attach, you attach to the soul, right? To the whole picture, to the way, and in animation, it's really, everybody is 33 1/3%. It's very, very evenly sliced up in that way, which I think is quite unusual. So
Karl praying for carnage there.
Well, while I think, relating to the soul might be a little over dramatic, I do think there's something to be said because, Big Mouth, if you remember a few seasons ago, took Jenny Slate out of the character Missy, who's a half Jewish, half black character, but presents black, I guess, in the show. So they took Jenny Slate out of the role and replaced it. Jenny Slate was doing like a pretty funny voice for that character. Mm-hmm. And now if you go and watch that show, it doesn't make any sense to have that character because it's just someone speaking the way she actually speaks in real life.
Well, the same thing happened with The Simpsons with Dr. Hibbard. Who's the black doctor, and they had a cast because of this craziness where it's like you can't. Jenny Slate took herself off of Big Mouth for that.
Right,
she's an idiot. But because of this thing where it's like you can't have a non-black person playing a black person or non-gay playing gay, whatever. So now they have like this voice actor doing Dr. Hibbard. It doesn't sound like him at all, and the character's not funny anymore. So it's like, oh,
right,
good job.
Yeah, and I mean we'll talk about Apu at the end, but so that's the real debacle. But it is a thing like. If you changed Homer's voice, it would be a different show. Like the idea that no one would notice that is silly.
What's going to happen with Rick and Morty?
I was just going to say that.
To see because Justin Roiland, I mean, so much of the comedy there is the way that he does those voices.
I haven't
Unless
watched.
they find a perfect impersonator, I don't think they'll be able to do it.
I think they've showed some of the people they had on Instagram or something, and it sounds exactly like them. But like the essence of Rick and just the timing and shit of like the noises he makes is probably going to be off. And I don't know, it's going to be weird.
Yeah, definitely tough to duplicate. But also, I will say on the network's defense, it's like voiceover work. I think is pretty easy. So like the idea that you should be paid the same as Jerry Seinfeld at that time. You know what I mean? Like someone like the amount of time it takes to be an actor on a show versus just doing the voices. There is something to that like it's not a 1-to-1 comparison.
100%. Although this is something, I don't know if you guys realize this, just something, I picked up from reading this book is when they go through and they act out these scripts, they have every line said 4 to 5 different ways. And then they go through and pick which is the funniest way to interact with the other characters. They're not doing it live, obviously. They're just reading their lines. So I would say, I mean, the amount you mentioned, it takes 9 months to produce one episode. There's so much time that goes into it. I can't imagine going through, you have to read every line with 5 different inflections or emphasis. And then someone has to go through there and listen to every single one and go, okay, this is the right one. Use that.
Yeah. And then you have guys like Hank Azaria, who's talking to himself in a lot of scenes. He's got so many voices.
Right.
Yes.
All right. What's next?
A Star is Burns.
Yeah, so now we're talking about a couple of the episodes. So A Star is Burns is the one that is directly related to The Critic, which we mentioned earlier. So James L. Brooks and a couple of the other writers kind of started focusing around season 6, I think it was. Started focusing more on The Critic, which was a show, a cartoon voiced by the main character is voiced by John Lovitz. That was about a film critic. And by all accounts, Carl, you said you were a fan of that show?
I wasn't a huge fan, but I watched it when it came out.
I've heard like good reviews. Like people say it's very underrated. I've heard positive things about it, but it never really found its audience. Like it never connected. So let's play this clip about A Star Is Burns, and I'll tell you a little more about it.
As predicted, Groening wasn't happy with the proposed crossover, feeling that it was just a tacky 30-minute advert for The Critic. Furthermore, despite Gina Reese's legitimate
I should have given it more setup. I was wrong. So they did a crossover episode where John Lovitz's character is in Springfield or something. And in the episode, it's a very loose, it was hard to understand exactly how it tied in other than we're just doing cross promotion. And this was a big dispute between James L. Brooks and Matt Groening, because Matt Groening's thought was, this is not a commercial for your other show. We're doing something here. And so that's what they're talking about here.
The Critic. Furthermore, despite Gina Reese's legitimate efforts to distance their show from The Simpsons, Groening was concerned that people would incorrectly associate the show with him as a direct spin-off of The Simpsons. Initially, Groening kept his concerns behind closed doors. However, he would eventually go public with these issues with A Star Is Burns, before having his name removed from the episode's credits, so he didn't receive the typical created by and developed by credits that air at the end of the opening sequence. Although Brooks appreciated Groening's issues with the crossover, Brooks was furious with how Groening conducted himself in relation to the controversy. Specifically, that Groening went public with his complaints.
Yeah, so Groening basically mocked them and distanced himself as much as he could from that episode, which is definitely a riff. And this is where you start to chisel at the armor of The Simpsons, where they tried to do things, kind of based in reality, at least the reality of that world. And that's what Matt Groening was very focused on protecting. And this is the start of kind of chipping away at some of that.
I don't understand why like the people in those documentaries always have to talk with those inflections. It's so gross.
Well, hey, go criticize his YouTube. What can I tell you?
But the next one's the big one.
The Principal and the Pauper?
Yep.
Yeah, so Carl's not as much of a nerd as I thought, because he wasn't familiar with this theory that the Principal and the Pauper is the death nail in The Simpsons. This is where everything turned.
Controversial episode.
What's that?
Sorry, I've read up on it since you brought that up to me, because I guess I didn't realize that a lot of people think this is the jumping the shark moment, and this is early in season 9.
Yeah, it's interesting. We'll play this and I'll get your thought. I'm curious as a big Simpsons fan if you agree with this, but let's hear a little bit about it.
Controversial episode, which is based off of Jorge Borges' short story, The Improbable Imposter Tom Castro, gives us the backstory of Armin Tamzarian, who served in the army, befriended Sergeant Seymour Skinner, and then assumed his identity after Skinner presumably died in the war. The now infamous episode was almost universally panned upon its release. Series creator Matt Groening called it one of his least favorite episodes on the season 9 DVD box set. And even Harry Shearer, the voice of Seymour Skinner and many, many others on the show, said this to the writers after having read the script. "That's so wrong. You're taking something that an audience has built 8 or 9 years of investment in and just tossed it in the trash can for no good reason. It's so arbitrary and gratuitous, and it's disrespectful to the audience." In an interview years later, Shearer added this in reference to the episode. "It's like punishing the audience for paying attention."
So, Carl, does that seem drastic to you, or do you kind of get it?
No, I kind of get it. It was really stupid because Skinner's character is this mama's boy.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make any sense. Like, that was the wrong character to do this with, because now we have to explain why the mom just went along with it, even though she obviously knew that wasn't her son, but she acts like he is. Like, it doesn't make any fucking sense. It was just a really stupid plot point.
Right. And if you guys are interested in the subject, there's a little like mini documentaries on YouTube that I got sucked into. So if you guys search, I think it's The Fall of the Simpsons and The Day the Simpsons Died are the two that I watched. They really get in depth, but it does make sense because Family Guy had a similar thing where, and even, you know what, Seinfeld, I know more about Seinfeld, so that's probably a better example. In the early days of Seinfeld, like, you know, the culmination of the finale is like, oh, these are bad people that are finally getting what they deserve by going to jail. But like in the early days of Seinfeld, this plot was not that they were bad people. It was actually that they were like good people. They were trying not to do the things that would make them considered bad people. And the more the show went on, things got more and more exaggerated. And that's why it kind of turned to this like, oh, they're evil people is what essentially the narrative became. And it makes sense that like, well, the other example they used after Seymour Skinner was basically Homer went from, kind of a doofy dad, like who wanted to do the right thing but never could, to like a functionally retarded man.
Yes. He does get stupider and stupider every season.
Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly.
And Conan even, I heard Conan kind of take responsibility for that because he said literally, I think we wrote an episode where Homer's brain says, if you do this, I'm out of here. And then Homer does whatever they're doing. And then you hear a door slam and feet walking away. And so they're like, even when Conan was there, 25, 30 years ago, they were literally like, I think we've made this guy too dumb. Right. Keep going.
But next
so that's about season 9 where they're like, okay, which that's for television, 20 episodes a year, 20 plus episodes a year for 9 seasons. That's a tremendous amount of television. And then they have gone on for more than 20 since then.
I know. It's nuts.
It's insane. But also there was also a element they had. I can't remember what season it was, where we find out that Homer shoved a crayon up his nose when he was a child.
Yep.
And they remove it and he's smart. And then he decides he doesn't like being smart. So then he puts the crayon back in. So I think a few times they tried to explain why this character is as stupid as he is.
Yeah, right.
Makes sense. But next we have him talking about the movie.
So this was interesting. Again, I want to hear from Karl what the fans think. This is them talking about the movie. By the time the movie came out, my opinion would be, well, just fucking go for it. You've gone. A different way of saying that is they offered us a lot of money and I got rid of Matt Groening and Sam Simon. So no one could hold me back.
Interesting.
Did the movie live up to at least what the episodes were at that time?
Yes. And I think everyone enjoyed the movie. It definitely brought people interested in The Simpsons again, as it had been waiting for a while. But it wasn't like as good as their best episodes by any means. Sure, and it wasn't anything that was like bigger or better than a typical episode that was coming out at that time. So I think everyone enjoyed it because The Simpsons is enjoyable and they have funny writers and there's great characters. Everyone loves the characters, but it's no bigger, longer and uncut. The South Park movie was like, whoa. Yeah, they made an entire musical and there's a war with Canada. It's like this is a movie, The Simpsons is kind of like, we got ourselves into a predicament again. How are we going to get out of this one,
Yeah, so the movie came out in 2005 or 2006, I think. So by that time, they're in season 16 or whatever. So my thought on that is like, how much are you really going to damage the, you know what I mean? It's just like a 4 episode season, basically, is what you're making. So who cares? Just fucking go for it at that point. Whatever damage was going to be done has already been done.
And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't research this. I think it did pretty well at the box office. I think they were happy with the results.
Yeah.
And
it certainly didn't bomb, I don't think.
Yeah. And I got the sense at the time that they were going to make more of those. I mean, they've referenced it on the show since then. That was the Spider Pig came out of that, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
It's weird.
So I'm surprised they haven't made more movies.
It's weird that they're still it's funny because I think the reverse. I'm surprised they're still on in the sense that, going back to that Conan thing, some of the writers on there were talking and basically saying like, I'm not sure if The Simpsons makes Fox money anymore because it's so expensive to produce and the cast commands, so much money now. So like, I don't know that The Simpsons is making money even now or how much money it's making. So it's weird to me that it's still on at this point. I don't know what the benefit is really.
The Simpsons movie did $536.4 million in the box office.
Well, not too shabby.
Wow. That's insane.
That's insane for sure.
That would be, it would have to be an Avengers movie to make that now.
Right.
No one's doing that.
Seriously.
Right.
All right. What's next?
Next, we have a sad excuse for a comedian lashing out at a poo.
Oh, we're already at the okay, good. I'm getting Karl out of here on time. All right, thank God. So yeah, the problem with Apu is our, I think, last subject here. We have a few clips, and it goes back to something we were talking about a little earlier, where obviously Apu, if you're not familiar, character in The Simpsons that runs the local convenience store, and voiced by Hank Azaria, has a stereotypical Indian voice. And the reason for that is because Hank Azaria was already in the building, and it's kind of funny, and it's playing on stereotypes, which every Simpsons character pretty much does. But Hari Kanabalu found that to be different. So this is a little bit of him on The Daily Show talking about the documentary he made, The Problem with Apu.
Ugh.
It's even the Daily Show audience was like, "Oh, Jesus!"
They were giggling at spots they shouldn't have either.
It's weird because, first of all, I just don't like Hari Kanabalu's energy, where he's like, "Hey, I don't really give a shit." It's like, well, why'd you make a documentary about it?
Like literally just
right.
to cash in on the woke bullshit. That's all.
And by the way, I was just talking about this because we did a show with Dan Harmon used to do Whiting Wongs with this woman, Jessica Gao, who's a writer in Hollywood. And she's a Chinese woman who was talking about how problematic Apu is. And she had a real problem with them ever having Apu on the show and continuing to have Apu on the show. And you know, what, like you said, everything on The Simpsons is a stereotype.
Right.
You know, they got the drunk Scottish guy, they got the Italian guy who makes pizza.
Right.
And,
but not even the side characters. Like Bart is a stereotypical young boy. Lisa's a stereotypical nerd. Homer is a stereotypical like doofy white dad. Like, but the family itself is all stereotypes.
But this doc isn't about how the Simpsons hurt him. It's how kids bullied him. And so it's like, well, kids are dicks. Yeah, we get that. It's not Hank Azaria's fault. And by the way, very funny note is that Mike Reese writes in this book that when they wrote in the first time the character wasn't Apu at first, it was just the convenience store clerk. He wrote in parentheses next to the line, "not Indian." And he goes, and Hank Azaria does not read directions well.
Oops.
Because he actually didn't want to have, because that was kind of the stereotype at that time that every 7-Eleven person, you know. So he tried to get him to not do that. And then everyone laughed when he did the Apu voice. And they're like, okay, well, it's Apu now.
Well, what's interesting, though, is like, yes, it's I guess a stereotypical voice. But if it did not sound like any Indian person who's ever existed, we would all go, what's that I don't understand. What's he doing? You know what I mean? Like, we all got what he was doing. So it's not like no one speaks like that. So
and it's also been pointed out many times, but Apu is one of the more endearing characters on the show.
Right.
He's likable. Everyone likes him. He's always in a good mood. He's always upbeat.
Hardworking businessman.
Yeah, exactly. Family guy, big family, all that kind of stuff. So this whole thing, and he goes back to India. They do things with the culture and his religion. And it's like, this is not the guy that if you're going to try to get the woke crowd against, I don't think that's the right target. But it got to the point where Hank's like, look, I don't want the heat, so I'm just going to stop doing it.
Yeah. So is the next clip Akash or Hank? I forget.
Hank.
Oh, okay. So we'll hear Hank Azaria kind of talk. And this was, there's a lot of words here. But yeah, I think like Karl said, the gist of it is like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore.
Right.
Well, I did all those characters with love and to the best of my ability. And as you said, they were created in a time where we didn't think twice about providing voices like that, or caricaturing or parodying different ethnicities. And that's part of that. It turned out to be part of the problem is we didn't consider it. We didn't consider the ramifications it might have. And in some ways, those consequences weren't clear for 10, 20, 30 years later. And with, people who grew up, Indian people who grew up with the character of Apu in this country and could honestly report about what that was like for them. And, it wasn't a quick decision for me. It wasn't like I heard the documentary or saw it or heard it was coming out and then went, that's it, I'm not doing this character anymore. It sent me on a journey of discovery, which I encourage every person in this country to take, certainly every white person in this country to go on. And then there's a lot of talk about it now. And there's a lot of backlash about, it's not okay to be white. And it's not about that. It's about acknowledging, for most people, it's just blind spots. It's just not considering what the consequences might be, the effect it might have had on people of color, whether they're Indian or Latin or Black or whatever part of this culture.
This goes on forever.
And really considering the effect that it may have had.
Yeah, so that was a really long way of Hank Azaria saying, like, am I still going to get jobs? Like, are people not going to hire me now? What's going on here?
This poor guy, that documentary comes out, and now he has no choice but to do that.
Yeah. But, you know what, I will say, though, like, there's a point to be made in, like, yeah, now, why not just get an Indian guy to do that voice? Like, that's fine if that's what we want to start doing. Now, my other argument would be like, well, we didn't 30 years ago, so just make a new cartoon where it is voiced by Indian people. But
Well,
I
the
do
reason
understand.
why they're not getting an Indian person to voice that is because it's offensive that he even is running the store.
Right.
Right? So that's why they didn't just replace the actor, which is ridiculous.
Right. My boy Akash Singh kind of agrees with you. So he put out like a 20. He does a podcast with Andrew Schultz, and he put out like a 25-minute special, technically, a couple years ago. And his one of his big bits in that was kind of talking about how he grew up relating to Apu, and so he was talking a little bit about it on Rogan as well.
I just thought I understand the context with which The Simpsons was created. It was a show that came out in the late 80s. I didn't know any Indian actors, much less voiceover actors, to do that voice. So he did it, and then he brought it to life. And I looked at The Simpsons and I said, this is the most three-dimensional supporting character on that entire show. Everybody else is a static. Chief Wiggum is static. Moe is completely static. Barney's a drunk loser all the time. Apu is like three-dimensional, and he evolves more than every character on that show, including The Simpsons. He gets married, he loses a business, gains a business, has kids, becomes a father. So, like, I love that story. That's a beautiful story. He's the American dream on that show.
Have they completely removed him from the show?
He's gone from the show. And I think it's fucked because, dude, Apu, if it was voiced by a brown person, Apu is so many of our parents. And I don't mean that I mean that in the most respectful way. Like, I used to always hear, back in the heyday, people would say The Simpsons represents every level of society. That's why the politician is a sleazebag and the billionaire is a corrupt fuck. And Apu, I really thought, whether they meant to or not, represented the American dream. He came to this country in search of a better life. He worked hard. He was mostly honorable, and he built a fucking life. And that is our parents. And we should all be so proud of our parents. And it sucks that a white guy was doing the voice, but at the time, I don't think they had an option. He's doing 12 voices. They just threw him one extra.
Right.
They didn't have a budget. And then he made it something. So I would say some of the jokes were a little hacky. You can evolve those, but you don't get rid of the guy completely.
Yeah, I actually think that at the end of it, that's the best way to say it is like some of the jokes probably were hacky and offensive and lazy even. But like, yeah, evolve those, but it doesn't mean you have to go on a crusade to get rid of the character because that does nothing really.
Right. And I think Apu's actually been on the show since, but just in the background with no lines.
Oh, good. Good. Thank God.
So they're like, let's just get rid of him completely. But
all right. Well, The Simpsons still soldiers on, I guess. So we have no real conclusion here. But is there anything I missed, Carl?
Oh, well, yeah.
I mean, there's a lot I missed.
You did everything.
There's a lot I
I'm
missed.
just kidding. No. There's one thing that I did want to talk about.
Yeah.
Talking about specific episodes. My favorite and my band, The Isotopes, which is based on the baseball team in The Simpsons. So my band just recorded an album. It's a concept album based on the Poochie episode of The Simpsons, season 8. I think it's episode 14. I think it's one of the most brilliant comedy shows ever made, because basically what was happening at that time is that this is when people started going like, season 8, you're like, how long is this going to go on for? It's getting stale. It's all the same kind of stuff. And so this whole episode is like this meta episode where the writers fought back against those people by building it within the show. There's a cartoon, Itchy and Scratchy, and no one was watching that anymore. So they had to introduce a new character, but in The Simpsons, they also have a new character named Roy. So anyway, the whole thing is brilliantly put together. There's so many funny lines in there. And I highly recommend anyone who's not into The Simpsons or can't remember that episode, go back and watch the Poochie episode of The Simpsons.
Well, I think you might have mentioned it in there, but I think that it was birthed from them trying to like the network was demanding they create a new character or something. So
right.
Yeah, so they were just essentially goofing on that, which is the type of shit I love. Like 30 Rock would do that all the time. Like I love when networks would just openly mock their bosses in primetime television. But yeah, we could easily do a part 2 of The Simpsons. There's a lot I know that I missed. So if you guys want to send me stuff, if we ever do a part 2 or a bonus episode, send me anything you think I should talk about on the next one. And we will make sure to do it on the Patreon that you can find at blindmike.net, but also make sure you go to whoarethese.com, support my buddy Karl, listen to Who Are These podcasts. Like you said, he was making fun of Dan Harmon this week, which was crazy. It's crazy that Dan Harmon, like I've watched a little bit of Rick and Morty and I was a big Community fan. It's crazy that like he just did a podcast begging to erase those memories of him, kind of. Hey, just forget I was apologizing.
Just apologizing for being white. Like Hollywood really does just ruin people. It's very sad. But Who Are These podcasts? Also, the Creep Off. I do with my buddy Vinny Paulino Mondays at 1:00 on the Creep Off YouTube channel. Guys, I am sorry, I do have to run. All right. Thanks so much for having me on today,
Karl. Thanks for coming on, buddy. We'll see you later.
Yep. Talk to you soon.
Also, make sure you go to blindmike.net. That's where you can find my show, all of my shows. Subscribe to the Patreon if you want those bonus episodes, WATS, that I do with Karl as well. And go to verygoodshow.org. That's where you can support Craig and everything he's doing. Listen to Very Good Show for free. And then if you like it, go support the Patreon. Do that with our show and Karl's show as well. We appreciate all the support, guys. And we will talk to you next time on Why Are You Laughing?